it takes 3 to 5 years to get a product to be adopted, especially now with the value analysis teams in each hospital that essentially it's their job to make certain that a product has a return on investment that also improves patient care. And that process takes a very long time. So when you're building your projections and you're doing your modeling, don't be overzealous in your projections. Be very honest with yourself about you're going to get uptake. It's going to take 2 or 3 years. I'm raising capital to give myself enough runway to make certain that I can survive the vicissitudes and the friction that exists in the medical device space.
Welcome, MedTech Gurus. Today we're joined by Bob Cooper, CEO of SMoLTAP, the company behind a breakthrough in infant procedural care, an innovative device designed to improve success rate and patient experiences for infant lumbar punctures, sometimes called spinal taps. SMoLTAP's positioning cradle secures infants in a consistent seated posture that enhances procedural accuracy and reduces the physical strain on clinical teams. Traditionally, infant lumbar punctures had high failure rates because physical restraint and positioning were inconsistent, requiring multiple staff and risking repeat procedures. But early data and clinical experience show that the SMoLTAP cradle enables higher success rates without sedation, streamlines workflow, and reduces stress for clinicians, families, and the infant alike. Bob is a seasoned C-suite executive with decades of leadership experience, now applying his strategic vision to pediatric medical innovation and commercialization. Hey, Bob, are you ready to be our guru today?
Yes, Tom. Hi, Tom. How are you doing? It's good to see you again.
Good to see you. So we're very excited to have you. So tell us something fun or interesting about yourself or your family so we can get to know you a little better.
Well, probably the funniest part of my background, I've been an entrepreneur my entire life. I started a company in college, grew that, was in the energy management field. We ended up getting into literally hundreds of McDonald's and Burger Kings and a bunch of different restaurants managing their energy, and we sold it to a big heating and cooling contractor. So, and then through a couple of different phases, I ended up doing things like I was a CEO of Bodie Miller Ski Company for a number of years, and I've done all sorts of interesting things, and have seen that in this space, in the medical device space, we've kind of pulled a lot of ideas and concepts about customer acquisition and marketing and how to position products. But really, it's more focus. For me, the real focus of business is really making certain that we're listening to the customer, addressing a need. And the thing about this product and this company is really, it's taking care of those important little ones. So I've been proud to be associated with SMoLTAP.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And working with Bodie Miller had to be pretty wild. I bet you have some really good ski stories that came out of that one.
I'll tell you what, when you're skiing down a run with Bodie Miller, he's teaching you how to counter rotate. You've entered a different level of skiing.
Yeah, I'm confident in that. So, Bob, SMoLTAP's core innovation is really surprisingly simple, if I understand this correctly. It's a positioning cradle, right? Yet it tackles really a complex procedural challenge. So, what was the original insight or clinical observation that sparked the idea for the SMoLTAP and the positioning cradle?
Well, this product was actually invented by 2 doctors at Brown University at Hasbro Children's Hospital, one a hospitalist and another a neonatologist. Dr. Ravi De Cruz, the neonatologist, is now in Seattle. He works for Pediatrics at Swedish and Evergreen. And Dr. Brian Alverson, the other founder, was a hospitalist and is a hospitalist, is now at Johns Hopkins. In 2019, Dr. Alverson is a hospitalist, and he's done thousands of taps, spinal taps on babies. And he has a very high success rate, but there are those times where the holder isn't doing a good job holding, or the baby's kind of in a difficult position, or their anatomy isn't working just right. And there's a lot of variability that comes along with that. So in 2019, Brian had one of those babies that he could not get a tap on it. He tried 4 times. He basically said he macerated this poor baby and was just really frustrated because the holder really was having trouble holding the baby in the right position. He walked out of that room and was just thinking to himself, enough with nurses or med students and techs holding babies and having all this variability. And he ran into Robbie DeCruz in the hallway as he's walking down the hallway out of that room. And Robbie was an architect before becoming a doctor, one of those, underachievers. And Robbie said to Brian, in that moment, he said, "Look, I'm teaching a class at Rhode Island School of Design, RISD, in medical device industrial design. Do you have any ideas for the semester's project?" Is, boy, do I have an idea. And the two of them talked about it, and right at that moment, there was this spark that just hit by both of them, like, oh my God, let's create a device, a chair, something to hold the baby in a stable, consistent position so you don't have to rely on nurses or techs holding the baby to put it in the right position. Because today, the position, they put the baby on its side and they basically take the baby's face and they jam it in between the baby's knees to actually open up the space between the vertebrae, L3 and L4, to stick a needle in, to pull spinal fluid out, to have it tested for meningitis in a baby that is called febrile, which is essentially a baby has a fever that they haven't done, that they can't figure out why the baby has a fever. And so I want to add one more thing to that, Tom. We've done some research sort of on the history of this procedure, and there was an Austrian doctor in 1890 that realized meningococcal, that the virus and bacteria, he recognized and discovered that. And they've been doing this procedure this same way since 1890.
Wow.
And I think it's probably time to change. And so what this device actually did was change that. And I know we'll get into this more, but it's just remarkable to me that the pace of change sometimes. And, we're proud to be bringing this new, innovative, consistent, repeatable solution.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And isn't it interesting sometimes how serendipity just comes into play here, right? That one situation led to this whole change concept, right?
That's right. And what else is really fortuitous and sort of interesting is in Providence, Rhode Island, there's SMoLTAP's part of this. It's called New England Medical Innovation Center, NEMIC. And NEMIC is this place where doctors and innovators come to help from concept all the way through to commercialization, new ideas and new products. And Dr. Alverson and Dr. DeCruz had by themselves been trying to design something. And so NEMIC actually connected them with Dan Nelson at Nelson Product Development. And they it took about 3 years going in and out of the clinic to try to develop and design this product, but working with like a professional, like probably one of the, I would say one of the country's best medical device designers, this fellow Dan Nelson. They really, honed and crafted this device. In fact, I've got sort of almost a museum of SMoLTAP, but this is the first design for SMoLTAP. And it went through other designs that didn't have a floor and it had movement to it. So it was a really fascinating early stage innovation piece where you've got experiencing clinicians, we're going in and out of the clinic, you're connected in with the device designer, et cetera.
Yeah, so
sorry for going a little long.
No, that's great. It's
incredible the way this came.
Yeah, it's a fascinating discussion to see how this emerged right from initial concept to where it's at today, and we'll get into that even a little further. But just to get a little deeper into the process, though, As mentioned, lumbar punctures have a historically high failure rate in infants. So help us out. Can you explain how the SMoLTAP device changes the mechanics and outcomes of the procedure? What's going on there that you're driving better success rates?
Sure. Today, a febrile infant comes into an emergency department, for example, or a NICU, and they place normally, sometimes the baby's sitting, but normally the baby is placed. If they go through the first level of testing and they can't determine why the baby has a fever, they'll then go to the next layer of testing. They'll place the baby on its side. They'll actually put the baby in some call it croissant, some in a C position, where they basically smush the baby into this C position. And what that is doing is it's actually opening up this space between L3 and L4 vertebrae so they can get a needle through it. Well, the baby's on its side and it's kicking and screaming and twisting and turning, and you're not able to really do anything but hold that baby really tight, really strong so they don't move. Well, the fact is the baby doesn't like that position. It's kicking and screaming and moving and throwing up and decompensating, and all of these different things are happening. It makes it very hard to get that needle through that vertebrae into the spinous cavity. So the failure rate, the published failure rate, or we can flip it on its head, success rate, the success rate is about 50%. And what happens is a lot of those babies get admitted into the hospital unnecessarily. So what this device does is it puts them in a chair, and you can see the device behind me. It puts the baby in a seated position, and it allows gravity to actually bring more spinal fluid in the spinous cavity. So it's in a better position. You're able to have a lot less dry taps. The seat actually posteriorly tilts the pelvis. So the baby's pelvis is tilted so that that space opens, and then the baby's forward lean, and that opens the space. And then the baby is kind of held by these arm guards. We call them baby huggers now. I'm going to bring the device over, Tom, just so everybody can see. So there are the baby's in this really nice position, and these arm guards, we call them baby huggers, are holding the baby in a nice position. And you can give the baby sugar water, sucrose, it's called Sweeties, and it actually calms the baby down very quickly. Sugar water in the first 2 months of life kind of acts like morphine without the side effects. So this device actually puts the baby in this great position. They're very stable, they're sitting, and the pelvis is tilted, so it's open. So the device itself is very simple, it's very straightforward, and it allows for repeatable, consistent position so that you increase the likelihood.
Yeah, I love that, and it leads into kind of my next question, if I've got this right. In a peer-reviewed study that I saw published in Pediatric Radiology, I believe it was, SMoLTAP used, or the SMoLTAP yielded a 93% success rate and zero sedation, right? So as you mentioned, that's a notable shift from other methods. I think you mentioned it was like 50% in the old method. So with that success rate, what does that mean for clinicians, departments, or hospital operations?
I'm going to there's some nuance there with that question. So the Children's Hospital Los Angeles study with Joe Miller and Xin-Wu Li showed that interventional radiology, they use ultrasound guided and some other things to actually get to the right spot to actually go in. And so interventional radiology is a little bit higher success rate, prior to having this chair. But their one main challenge is holding. And even in interventional radiology, so what they have to do in interventional radiology, they actually a lot of times had to sit the baby up the way the ultrasound works. And then two nurses actually had to hold. And usually they'd roll up towels and they'd tape the baby to the table, have all these crazy strategies. And so holding was really the challenge. Now with our device, they have this repeatable, consistent procedure, and they're actually up over 93%, in particular in interventional radiology. And then when you go down to the ED, the first stick rate went from the low high 30s, low 40s, up to over 60+%, just because they're getting that consistency and repeatability.
Wow, that's fantastic. So, how have nurses and physicians and other clinicians responded to SMoLTAP in a real world use? Based on that, what kind of feedback are you seeing, and what's been the most powerful?
A lot of the doctors and nurses were like, I can't believe I didn't invent this. um, so the response from nurses has been incredible. This device, they no longer have to hold the babies. It's really up to the nurses. And sometimes they can be holding a baby in that position while the baby's trying to open up or pushing against their hands. It's almost like isometrics for an hour. And so the nurses in particular just can't even believe that finally something like this exists. The doctors love it because now all they have to think about now, and by the way, the nurses now can spend time dealing on patient care as opposed to squishing a baby in this position. And it really sort of ups their licensure to where they should be, instead of holding a baby. With doctors, it makes it much easier for them because now all they're doing is they're worrying about the angle and depth, not worrying about moving skin and moving babies and hitting bone or hitting a capillary or something. And then the other thing too is the really big thing that we hear all the time is one, it makes the procedure much quicker because the first attempt rate is much higher. And so the procedures go from taking an hour or more sometimes to 10 or 15 minutes now. So that alone is helpful. But the big thing is the stress, the reduction in stress. The whole procedure is much calmer, much simpler, much more straightforward. And if the hospitals that have parents in the room, it makes it much easier for the parents to be in the room, and the mom or dad can actually be giving the baby sweeties, and it goes quickly, and it makes it the response has been incredible. Everyone who's used this device loves it.
Yeah, that's interesting because you mentioned a reduced stress, right? And we talked a little bit about accuracy. So, beyond the success rate, right, there's this emotional piece, the workflow component, we touched on, reduced stress and better accuracy and including fewer hands needed to hold the infants. So for our gurus out there, right, there's a lot going on here. How do you communicate these kinds of benefits to healthcare decision makers? Can you help us with that piece for leading into the sales and commercialization part of it?
Sure. So the channels of communication include email, telephone, advertising, LinkedIn, social media. But our biggest communication vehicle is conferences. We go to 5 or 6 very big conferences, American College of Emergency Physicians, et cetera. But really, the communication is very centered on a number of different points. Point one is the consistency and repeatability, and improves that first stick rate, reduces the unnecessary admissions in the hospital. And with nurses, they no longer have to hold, they don't hurt their hands or their backs. With doctors, they're getting a much higher success rate. Baby patient care is much higher. And we use those channels of communication with all those points to communicate the fact that this device is and should be kind of a standard of care just because of how successful it compared to the prior solution the device is.
Yeah, that's fascinating, right? Because there's a lot of moving pieces here, right, that you have to communicate for not only the clinician but supply chain and value analysis. Am I heading down the right path with that?
Yep. And you mentioned value analysis. Value analysis it's an interesting challenge for the medical device world. Um, the value analysis really has a wonderful role to play as as new devices are introduced into the marketplace. They're looking at how this will impact. Well, value analysis has looked, at Children's Hospital and Boston Children's and Cincinnati and all the big hospitals. They've really looked at how reducing admittance rate, length of stay, reducing the number of taps and attempts, reducing the amount of people, resources that are required, reducing the amount of time it takes, the opportunity costs, etc. All of those pieces put together, we have some hospitals, it's almost blue sky, the return on investment in this project, on this product, to the point where some hospitals have looked at us and say, look, we paid for this device in our first unnecessary admittance because our reimbursement rates are so low and we have a long length of stay. So this product, the return on investment is very high. And that is a very structured communication strategy with the value analysis folks.
Oh, that's really, really helpful, and thanks for that. So, Bob, I want to just step back for a moment here because a lot of our gurus out there are entrepreneurs or soon-to-be entrepreneurs, and at the top, we kind of touched on the innovative process, right? And SMoLTAP here, as I understand it, is really a great example of human-centered design in medical devices, right? So, help us out. What was some of that initial process, and I'm thinking maybe even ongoing process for gathering feedback and then iterating the product with the clinicians and caregivers? Take us a little deeper into that story, if you might.
We were very deliberate about how we wanted to design this product and where we wanted to get to in order to have a product out in the marketplace that was reliable, consistent, sturdy, safe, and all of, we had a full list of requirements for the development team. And what we did was we ventured out, we did some research and found some of the experts that were commenting about lumbar punctures, infant spinal taps, meningitis out in the marketplace. And we found a doctor at Toronto Sick Kids, Natasha Kolia. There were a couple of doctors at Hasbro Children's, two or three other hospitals that I'll just leave nameless for this point. But we talked to them about what we're designing, what we're looking at, and we brought renderings and ideas and got feedback from those clinicians, and that got put into the product. Then we had two or three hospitals where we took 3D printed prototypes, brought it out to the market, got feedback, iterated the product, came back to them. They tested those products. We found a couple other doctors that were interested in doing it. We got feedback from them. We captured all the data, all the information, and we worked those updates into the product. It took over 3 years of product development. This looks like a very simple device. Well, there's an incredible amount of innovation, from the tilting of the pelvis to making sure that the mouth is open, to making sure the baby's head would fit, to have arm guard, those baby huggers that I showed you that actually slide up and down, to having pegs for different sized babies. Because this goes from about 35 to 37 weeks gestation up to a couple of months. And so we got to a particular point where we realized we had developed something that was incredible, and that was really wonderful for the market. And we've been able to, we're in over 100 hospitals now.
Oh, that's fantastic. Congratulations with that. But that leads into kind of my next question, because pediatric medical devices often struggle, right? They to find funding, to get market traction because of just smaller patient populations typically. So how has your team navigated some of this commercialization, investment, and scaling SMoLTAP with the broader pediatric care market? Can you give us some insights as to how you got to that 100 plus hospitals and growing?
Sure. It really does take, and just working with, other CEOs and communicating with them about how long it takes and what the process really is. It really does take a couple of years before you really get traction in the marketplace. But what we started out doing is we looked for specialty distributors. I didn't want to raise a lot of capital to, dilute the company. I wanted to make certain that I was able to have a full sales force across the US and Canada without having to pay FTEs. So we decided to go with specialty distribution to cover the entire United States and Canada. And we now have 5 distributors in the US and 1 distributor in Canada. So out west, we're using, PacBio and ClinTech in the Midwest, TLC and Amtech, CoBio in the East Coast, and then Dynamedical in Canada. And they're wonderful. They have great sales organizations. But really, not only was that key, but it's really educating those salespeople, going out in the field and working with them, and then hiring a VP of sales that actually, identified even better, especially distributors for us. That now we have those distributors in the market, and really taking and working really hard on targeting those big children's hospitals, big pediatric departments, and working with the sales folks, and making sure that they were doing a great job of educating, answering those questions, working on, as well as very recently working on large national GPO and IDN contracts, so that friction doesn't exist as you're walking into like an HCA hospital, for example. Just kind of knocking down all those barriers and making certain that the sales team has everything they need, from a value analysis calculator to brochures to demo products to the talk tracks, the Q&As, etc.
Yeah, I love the specialty distribution angle and not hiring FTEs, especially for early stage companies. Did you find they were acting like almost a brain trust for you, or regional business development folks?
Yeah, absolutely. What would happen is, the best sales reps out there really do go out in the field. They'll be in front of those doctors. They'll be asking those questions. They'll be, are you registered with the FDA? How do you clean the device? All those different questions that get asked. And so we work with them. And one of the big things that happened was we were getting a lot of feedback that larger babies were not fitting well in between what used to be called arm guards, now are baby huggers. And so we had to actually go back in the development cycle and worked on 2 pivot point arm guards that flexed in and out so it fit larger babies. So we actually got that feedback back from the field, and then we responded by launching and delivering those. In fact, we just launched those in September, and the doctors that are and nurses that are using this device now with the arm guards are ecstatic about the update. So that feedback is critical from the field. The other thing that very early on, the value analysis committee, we really didn't have a good value analysis calculator or a great story there. And so we hired some folks from, ex-McKinsey folks that helped us build a value analysis calculator. We worked with a couple of value analysis folks to really make certain, in fact, we worked with Barbara Strain, who's at Accelerant, to actually kind of make certain that our story was not only believable, but was accurate. And we had something that the value analysis folks could really use as a tool in their decision making.
Yeah, wow, that's incredibly helpful. So I'm curious, Bob. If I've got this right, you came on board with SMoLTAP after the initial concept and prototyping were done, right? From a very interesting background, including running a ski company. So what was it like taking a clinical idea and turning it into a funded, regulatory ready device? What was the business leadership lessons that you learned along the way? Can you provide any insights for our gurus out there?
So, as I mentioned before, and this probably isn't exactly the answer you're looking for, but it happens to be my learning. I'd run a software company in the medical device space, or the med space before the healthcare space. So I sort of understood the channel, how to communicate, understood the FDA challenges, et cetera. So I had some experience with that. What I really benefited from being part of New England Medical Innovation Center is we're surrounded by people that understand the FDA piece, we're a class 1 510K exempt, so I didn't have to really go through a lot of the deep, rigorous things that some other products have to go through. But we did have to go through the full QA QC project process with our manufacturer, had to go through at the registration piece for the FDA. We had to run through all the labeling, and that's really important for the medical device space. But really what I kind of learned out of that procedure is in any major metropolitan in any city, there are people who have an expertise in all the different areas that you need to attack. And I tried to learn a bunch of those myself, but really what ended up happening is I leaned on, people who are expert in the regulatory, people who are expert, the attorneys, the positioning folks, the marketing, the distribution piece, like every single, that whole, it takes a village. This was like a metropolitan city, all the resources that I pulled in from around the Rhode Island and Boston market. And so my learning was I realized what I didn't know, and I reached out to people. Do you know someone who knows about this? Yes, I do. And they connect me with that person. They came in and they very quickly solved the problem for me. So I really leaned on other people who had expertise outside the company. I sort of rented people's brains.
Yeah, that's really interesting, right? Because finding those experts and those consultants, I think in the long run probably helped you in terms of using capital efficiently. Am I heading down the right path with that?
100%. I save myself hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
Going to people who have a real expertise, be it sales and marketing to industrial design.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So, Bob, for our innovators out there and leaders listening today, what advice would you give to those entrepreneurs trying to bring a product similar to SMoLTAP to market today? Where adoption barriers can be high and clinical ones can be difficult. What advice would you give our listeners out there?
The one thing that I was not willing to accept is the fact that it takes 3 to 5 years to get a product to be adopted, especially now with the value analysis teams in each hospital, that essentially it's their job to make certain that a product has a return on investment, but also improves patient care. And that process takes a very long time. I mean, some of the big hospitals we've been working on, before we even got into a trial, it took 18 to 24 months. So that is one piece of advice. So when you're building your projections and you're doing your modeling, don't be over zealous in your projections. Be very honest with yourself about we're going to get uptake. It's going to take 2 or 3 years. I'm raising capital to give myself enough runway to make certain that I can survive the vicissitudes and the friction that exists in the medical device space. So that's from a sort of management of your cash flow perspective. From a marketing perspective, there isn't a better return on investment from the cost per lead, cost per sale, than going to very targeted, very specific conferences. Most of our conferences that we go to will get 150 to 200 leads. Almost all of our sales have come from talking to people in our booth at a conference.
Oh, that's remarkable and great advice. So, Bob, this seems like a really exciting time for you and your team at SMoLTAP. What does the future hold? Where are you going from here?
Well, we're doing everything in our power to be tracked towards, something become a standard of care. It's kind of like, when you see it. We can't tell people that this is a standard of care. We're working on all sorts of communication. We're working on some more. We had a couple of big studies. One was done by Toronto Sick Kids. A poster was presented by Natasha Cully at PAS 2025, talking about how traumatic taps went down, success rates went up, first stick went up, time savings, workflow savings, just the whole procedure being better. So we're spending a lot of time previously, but now in the future, we're working on studies where we're actually, proving in an even deeper way the things that we're saying and the things that we've seen and things we're hearing anecdotally. We also, over the next couple of years, we're looking to expand our product line. We've already added a face pad. We're adding a lift for interventional radiology. We're expanding into a smaller device, probably take another year or so, and to a neonatal, preemie device. And we're also working on a device I call the OR device, a larger device for babies that need a spinal anesthetic for operations. And so we're looking to expand our product line, and then we're also starting the process to get a CE to head into Europe.
Oh, that's fantastic. So it'll be fun to watch you for sure as this grows and develops. So,
It'll be a lot
Bob,
of work.
yes, indeed. And Bob, I'd like to just thank you and acknowledge you for all of the insights that you brought to our gurus today. If somebody wants to learn a little bit more, how do we do that? Are you on LinkedIn? Is there a company website? How do we learn more about you or SMoLTAP?
Well, certainly the best source of information is our website. It's www.smoltap.com. And SMoLTAP is spelled SMoLTAP.com. We have videos, we have resources, we've got all sorts of, doctor testimonials up on the site. My email address, if somebody really wants to, talk to me, feel free to email me. My email address is bob@smoltap.com.
Oh, fantastic. So, Bob, once again, thank you so much for the time and insights that you brought to us today and being our guru.
Thank you very much, Tom. Hopefully I didn't go too long on too many answers.
No, it was all great information, so we appreciate it.
It was great. Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. Have a good one.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to MedTech Gurus. I am Sylvester Harris, your MC. If you want to learn more about Tom and his consulting services, you can go to www.pctmedical.com or email Tom at tom@pctmedical.com. Now, I can be reached at Sylvester Harris, that's SylvesterHarris 5048@gmail.com, and I'd be pleased to discuss any voiceover work that you may want for your company or broadcast. Hey, thanks so much for listening, and catch us on the next episode of MedTech Gurus.